up on a few of the problems that we missed. Let's see, and I'm not going to do all these. I think we did everything on page 1. Yeah, let's go to page 2 and do number 12. That's worth doing because of the fractions in it, so I'm going to run through this one with you. This is, we're going to do completing the square. So I did completing the square on this, and generally, like on the Wednesday's exam from 2.3, just kind of follow the examples that I gave you. There's a lot of the factoring problems and that kind of thing where you're finding zeros. So here's completing the square. I don't put completing the square on the exam because it's more useful. Completing the square is more important for other kinds of problems than it is this kind of thing. Okay, so let me show you kind of what we're going to do on completing the square. First of all, we're finding a 0. And remember what we did is we let the function be 0. Okay, we're trying to find values of x that make that function equal to 0. All right, so we start this way. So we have 0 is x squared minus 10/3 x plus 25 over 9. And then I tried to write on here on your notes the steps that you do in completing the square. Okay, so I'm just going to follow through this step-by-step process. The first thing that you always want to do is you want to make sure that there's nothing in front of x squared. If there is, you divide by it to get rid of it. You have to do that. And then this number right here has to move to the other side. Okay, so I'm going to start this way. So what you guys want to do is you want to move that to the left side. And then that would give me negative 25 over 9 is equal to x squared minus 10/3 x like that, okay? And then we do the completing the square, all right? So what we do is you look at this number, and you always do the same thing with the number in front of x. You always take that number, and then you take half of it. Okay, so if you did that, you would have, let's see, that'd be, you can actually just reduce like this. So 10 over 2 is 5, so that would give negative 5/3. Okay, so you do that, take half of that. Then what you do is you take that result and then you square it, which you can do in your head. Square 5, that's 25. Square 3, that's 9. Okay, like that. Okay, so again, I've taken half of the 10/3, which is 5/3, and then I've squared that to get 25 over 9, and that's a positive number because I'm squaring that negative. Okay, is everybody with me so far? Okay, all right. Now what do you do with this? You take this number and you add it to both sides of the equation. You got to add it to both sides of the equation to balance that out. So what's going to happen, this kind of makes this problem kind of a little bit simpler because the left side ends up being 0. Okay, so what we'll do from here is just kind of work out what we have. It looks like that's going to be 0. And then this side, we're just going to factor this. Okay, and the factoring on this goes like this. The first term's x squared, so I have x and x. And what would I put here? Since that last term's 25 over 9, what would go there? What times what is 25 over 9? What times what is 25? 5 times 5. Okay, so it'd be 5/3 and 5/3. Okay, so it goes like that. And see, it just comes from what you did over here. You took the 5/3 and squared it. So what you'll have here is 5/3 and 5/3. And then it's 2 minus signs. It's 2 minus signs because you've got to make it add up to that negative 10/3 term like that. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now you just write this as 0 equals x minus 5/3 to the second, and then you do the square root property. Okay, so what you want to do now, don't FOIL that right side because that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're doing. Just square root both sides. Technically you have a plus or minus, but the square root of 0 is just 0, so that gives that. This side is going to give x minus 5/3, so this has one answer. What's the answer of this problem? 5/3, right. You can now solve that equation. You can solve that in your head. You don't have to write the step on that. So the only point that would be a 0 would be 5 over 3. Okay, that one wasn't as bad as I thought. Sometimes the things with fractions are just good exercises for students to do. Completing the square, you want to know how to do on your homework. The exam, I don't do that. Again, you use this a little bit more for what we call conic sections in like circles and ellipses and stuff like that. We'll do that only a little bit in this class. Okay. All right. So let's see. I wanted to pick up on a couple of things on this next page, and I wanted to do just one more thing with the quadratic formula, and then I wanted to do this number 17. Okay, so I think we did one of these things with the quadratic formula, it looks like, and then I want to just wrap up a few other things. So let's do 16 with the quadratic formula. So you do need to know the quadratic formula. Okay, so with this particular problem, again, we're finding the zero. So the first thing you always do is set the function equal to 0, and then identify what everything is. So in this problem, a is 1, the number in front of x squared, b is -6, and c is 45. Okay, now if this thing factors, you always try to see if they factor first, and if they don't, then the best thing to do is go to the quadratic formula. Okay? All right, so I'm going to write down the formula. Here's the formula right here that you need to know, and just plug everything in, and then we'll calculate. Okay, so it goes like this. So you have negative b. B is -6, so that becomes -6. And then you have plus minus. Under the radical, you have b squared. So that's -6 squared. Then you have 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 45 like this. And then that would be all over 2 times 1. Okay? So what we do is once you get a, b, and c put in, then it's just a matter of performing the arithmetic. So what you'd have is -6 is 6. And then underneath the radical, you would have 36. -6 squared is 36. If you take 4 times 45, that's 180 over 2. Okay, now at this stage in the class, all we got to do is look at that number right there. What kind of number is under the radical without even calculating? Is it positive or negative? That's what matters. That's negative. Okay, since that's a negative, we're not going to get what we call a complex zero yet in the class. So what we say now is we just say no real solution. At this stage in the class, that's what we're going to say. Okay, that we can go ahead and finish that, but we haven't talked about complex numbers yet. We'll do that a little bit later in the semester. Okay, so if that happens, then you're done. Okay, is everybody with me there okay? Okay, so be sure that you know how to do the quadratic formula okay. And then I want to also do this number 17. And 17 says you're going to find the points of intersection, and these are 2 quadratic functions. So if you want to find points of intersection, you don't have to graph to do that. You just set the 2 functions equal to each other. You're finding where they are equal. So what you would do is you would just start off the problem like this. You just say 2x squared minus 12x plus 18 is equal to x squared minus 12x plus 27. Okay, and that's a quadratic equation that we'll end up solving. So that will give you the points of intersection. If you graphed both of these on your graphing calculator, you would see where they cross over, if they do at all. I think they do. So what I'm going to do is just, remember, one side has to be 0 when you're solving a quadratic equation. So I'm going to do this, and you can do this in your head if you want to. I'm just subtracting x squared. I'm adding 12x. And then I'm subtracting 27. And then that way that gives the right side is just equal to 0. So that's what we want. Okay. The left side, you would have x squared. Those cancel out. And then that would be x squared minus 9 is 0. Okay. Now, can you solve that equation in your head? There's 2 answers. What are they? It's just in your head. 3 and -3. Now, you got 2 ways to do this. You can either factor, which would be the difference of 2 squares, where you have x plus 3x minus 3 equals 0. Or you could do square root property. You could say x squared equals 9, and then you could square root both sides. But either way you look at it, you get plus or minus 3. Okay? So your zeros are just 3 and -3 on them. Okay? So primarily in this section, what you're doing is you're finding zeros, of quadratic functions. So there's basically, the section ends up being a lot about quadratic formula, factoring, completing the square, different methods of solving quadratic equations. That's what it's about. So that's what you're kind of reviewing from your background. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to do the last one on the next page, is that last one. And I don't teach this by substitution. I think it's just as easy not to do these by substitution. I think my math lab might kind of, if you view an example, they're pretty likely to have you do by substitution. If you want to learn it that way, you can. What I do on this is I look at, and I can tell you a couple of ways you could do this problem. One way you could do is just multiply it all out, and then you could probably solve it by factoring. That's more work than what I'm going to show you, because basically this is kind of like a variable. You can think of that like a t and then maybe a t squared, okay, like that. I'm just going to do this totally by factoring and see if this makes sense to you. So what I would like you to do is let's just take two brackets, and let's see if we can factor this. All right, so what you do first of all is you look at this first term, and that first term, you're looking for two things that multiply to give this. And the only thing I can think of is 2 times x plus 1, and then x plus 1, right? That's it, okay? If that was 2t squared, you would say 2t and t. We're just saying a quantity x plus 1 squared. So that's how that goes, okay? Then we have the last term. And that last term is 16, so we have several possibilities. We have 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and we have 4 and 4. So we just have to try one until we find one that works out, okay? All right, I'm going to try 4 and 4, all right, just put it in, and I'm just going to see what happens. So I put a 4 there, and I put a 4 there. All right, is everybody with me okay what I'm doing? Okay. Just like factoring, it's just x plus 1 squared. You just treat that like a variable. Now what I do is this. If you FOIL this, that inner term would be 4 times x plus 1. This outer term would be 2 times 4, or 8 times x plus 1. Okay, well what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this to add up to 12 times x plus 1. So can you make that happen? Indeed, okay, 4 and 8 adds to 12, doesn't it? So you would just have a plus there and a plus there, so in your brackets you would have that. Okay, sometimes students don't see this very well, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why textbooks show substitution. But if you can see, the factoring is easier this way, you know, in my opinion, okay? So does that make sense, how that's factoring, how the combination's coming together? Okay, so then what you would do from here is just multiply this out. So this first bracket, just multiply everything out and collect like terms. So you'd have 2x plus 2 plus 4, then you got some like terms. And over on the other parenthesis, you have 1 plus 4 is 5, so you have x plus 5. Okay, like that, all right? Then what you end up having is 2x plus 6, and then x plus 5. I forgot to set, you're supposed to set the function equal to 0. I wasn't paying attention, but that's what we're going to do. Now it's pretty easy. You just set the factors equal to 0, get your two answers. So you would do 2x plus 6 equals 0. Then you would do x plus 5 equals 0 to get your two answers. Okay, so this would be 2x equals negative 6. Divide by 2, you're going to get x equals negative 3 would be one of your zeros. And then the other one you can do in your head, that's just x equals negative 5. So that's the way I do the problem. If it factors, just factor it, okay? Not going to focus on the substitution too much in this class. Everybody okay with what I did when I did it that way? Okay, because I think all the problems I assigned on 2-3 that are like this can be done with factoring instead of that substitution. Okay, any questions? Okay, all right, very good. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to do all of 2-4 today. And 2-4 is not on Wednesday's test. I kind of cut that off, you know, from about a week before. So we did most of 2.3. So that should give you time to do your homework and everything. So 2.4, let me close.